Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Digital Artcast. We are now rounding out the year. It's getting close to the end. Thank God. I know for some people, this piece of shit year couldn't get any worse. So I'm hoping that, looking towards the future and next year, there's going to be some positive things coming. And of course, like I hope and say every episode that this podcast and my little slice of the internet is helping you guys get through whatever you're getting through. Hopefully you're focusing on a project or you're building yourself up in some respects with a new skill set. I think with the walls closing in and the way COVID's hit us all, it has been a time for self-improvement. And again, I think, I'm quite humbled by the fact that a lot of people message me and say that the podcast is definitely keeping them going. So I want to do something very special towards the end of the year and get on probably the biggest guest I've had on my podcast. We've definitely spoke to some, top tier artists, but then I think this particular person that I've had on or going to have on just now is one that has been probably my most requested guest, and someone that I think just I personally have wanted to speak to on a level from artist to artist, because there's definitely an indication you can get from someone about how they are from watching an interview, but having an actual conversation is a whole different thing. So yeah, so today we are talking to someone who I think is I don't want to use the word legend, I don't want to maybe make him feel uncomfortable in that sense, but I definitely feel like some of the things he's worked on, the projects especially, have been legendary. So if you can please help me and welcome him along today's guest, Mr. Maciej Kuciara. Hey, Maciej.
Howdy.
How? Wow. Thanks for coming on and speaking to us. I'm definitely humbled and very honoured to have you here. It's been a long time in the making, but we've eventually got here. Thank God.
What an intro, though.
I know. Oh no, man! I definitely have to get people to the high standard they're regarded. And I think, like you said, we're talking just before we rolled, but you're like, I don't feel like I'm doing a lot, or I think it's like it's almost the imposter syndrome in a way, right? You always constantly feel like, my stuff's not that good, or I'm not. You're always kind of self-deprecating as artists. But then from the outside looking in, we understand that you've done a lot in the time you've worked in the industry. There's a lot of things you've left your fingerprints on that have become, massive projects. I mean, even way back when you were working on like Crisis, for God's sake. I mean, it's like, that was a big thing even then. But then,
right.
Coming to America, working on Last of Us, and then almost instantaneously, bang, you're into the film industry. You're working on massive projects there. Stuff like Ghost in the Shell when that dropped, and you and Ash and a couple other really big artists were working on that. And then of course you're heavy into Marvel, so you're into Avengers. Even most recently, stuff like Jungle Cruise or Wonder Woman, and of course now, stuff that's in kind of pre-production, which is like Guardians 3, Thor. There's so much going on, right? There's so many things. I think in the space of 15-ish years, that you've kind of just you've managed to land on these massive projects, and I don't think by luck, right? You've got to have some kind of talent to be noticed by especially the American market, because it is so
right.
There's so much going on there, right? And especially coming from this side of the pond where we are in Europe, like you don't get that plane ride unless you kind of know what you're doing, right? You have to be doing something that is competent in a sense. I mean, have you ever looked back and reflected, especially since 2020 hit, and that was kind of that end of decade thing? Did you look back and think, look how far I've come? Has that ever kind of landed on you?
Sometimes. I actually meant to ask you, how are you enjoying 2020 so far?
Fucking sucks, man.
I thought it was a good year. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I know. Jesus. I mean, I just want this thing to end at this point. It's like, the walls are closing in, and
it's a pretty crazy year. But I'll be honest with you. I'm personally, honestly, it's a mixed bag, because this year was kind of interesting. Like, albeit everything going on in the world right now, from like
Yeah.
professional level, it was really good for me. Like
Right.
I've managed to get some of the projects that I always wanted to get done on the personal level, and
Yeah.
succeeded. I found different passion here and there, different callings, and like personal sort of like discoveries as well, which I felt were something that I was missing for many, many years. And like a lot of self-reflection. And maybe it's because, and it's not even because, I had more personal time. I was actually more busy than I wish I were. I was
Right.
kind of like, it kind of sounds weird, but I was really hoping to get some time off when everything was going on with pandemic and whatnot, but I was lucky enough not to, which is I'm thankful for. But on the other hand, I was kind of like, god damn it,
Yeah.
I wish I had that personal time to like contemplate and think. But then on the other hand, I found I started mountain biking, for instance, this summer, and just by virtue of being out there so much, because I think I've spent easily like a couple of hours a week, if not more, in the mountains, and just biking and exploring terrain and going on trails. And that by virtue of being there, like you're obviously you see hikers and other bikers and whatnot, but for the most part you're alone with yourself and with your thoughts. Obviously if I ride with friends, that's a different thing, but it makes you want to like enjoy nature and think about your life a lot. That's something I found, like a wholesomeness of it almost.
Yeah, I mean, like in essence, I think we take that for granted in Scotland because we have so much beautiful lost countryside where you can kind of get lost for hours. But I always felt like even when I was in LA, like even when I was in LA last year for Lightbox, I was stunned about how much the city kind of towers over you, and also just the disparity between wealth and poorness. Like it was crazy as well. And it's something I think I see more because I'm in Scotland, but even our homeless situation, right, isn't that bad in all our city centres, and Glasgow's one of the the poorest cities in the world at this point, most especially Europe. I mean, I think it definitely is, but yeah, like I think if you can get out to nature more and walk away from the city, it definitely does revitalize you. And I mean, it's still got to be crazy to you, but I mean, even especially to me, moving from somewhere like a small town here in Falkirk, probably similar coming from Poland, where LA is like, it never shuts up, right? It's constantly shouting at you, even for the minute you land. But then has that noise dulled in the background over the years? Do you feel it anymore?
I moved out from LA for that reason. It's an insane city, and this year kind of exposed to me personally how insane the city is and how fragile everything is. Like, one of the things that when you get to LA, at least that was true when I got there, some years ago now, was that there's just so many opportunities, for you to grab, and you just have to be hustling to make them happen. And that was something that I always admired about the city. Like there's just the vibe of making stuff happen,
Yeah.
Like everywhere you would go in the city, that would be pretty much like the prevailing vibe, especially when you meet with other creatives and other artists and people working in the industry. There was always this sort of notion like I'm making something happen, and that kind of got you to that dance of like I want to make something happen too,
Yeah. Like working on your own shows and your own animations and
yeah. But then also like the tax that comes with it is just you're living in like a crazy beehive almost of humans,
Right.
You're just constantly in traffic. Everything costs fortune. The quality of living is like, unless you're rich, then it could be good, but otherwise it's just like, really, I'm paying so much for this,
Yeah.
And now it's just, you mentioned homelessness. You should come to LA, dude. Like right now, you would be, where am I? Like, what the fuck is going on? It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. And I'm a dad right now. Like I've been dad for a few years. I have a daughter.
Yep.
Mentioned this many times, and it's just at this point is for me and my family, it was just not a healthy place to be at all. And we kind of had that epiphany for many years, but nowhere near as intense of a feeling to get the hell out as this year. And
I mean, I was just going to say, like, for me especially, I think I was walking about Riot Games and walking about Blizzard, and got to tour a couple of studios when I was out there, and I thought, this is really cool. I mean, Riot especially seemed like an absolute dreamland, like the mecca for artists. But
it's a pretty insane campus that they have there.
Yeah, it is actually mental. But because I was out there visiting some of my friends on the Valorant team, and it's awesome. But then when you look at the future, because I'm 35 now, so I was an engineer in the railway industry till 28, and then I left to chase my dream, quote unquote. And now that I'm a bit older, things like kids are coming up, and what am I going to do and where am I going to live in the next couple of years, and stuff like, even just simple stuff like guns, healthcare, kids, like it does make you think about, well, where do I feel safest in the world? Where do I want to be, for that future to happen? And like I say, especially in Europe, because we have stuff like free universal healthcare, and our gun laws have been in place for a long, long time, so we don't have any of that. Although we have to put up with the Tory party in London, but in general, it's a pretty safe place to live. Like, but then I think for me as an outsider, right, I only see the TV version of America, right?
Yeah, I was about to say
guns everywhere, everybody's dying in the street. But like, is it something that you feel
watch
like
too much TV, dude?
yeah, it probably is. Like, you live there, right? Honestly, so you can tell me how you feel about the city. Do you feel it's somewhere you could still be for a while and could live there?
I mentioned this before the call. Like, the grass is always greener on the other side, and I think that the it's kind of crazy, because like anyone I talk with, like any Europeans friends, and I was in the same place as you were, like until I were here in America, living in America, my notion of what America is was like completely different. It was just movie based, basically. So I would just have an assumption like, oh, I saw this in the movie.
Yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger's the governor. What the fuck's happening?
I actually saw him on the bike one day in Santa Monica. Yeah, he was just strolling through the Santa Monica, but that was like a few years ago.
Yeah, I actually saw him in Edinburgh as well. He was cycling in Edinburgh at one point, smoking.
There you go.
I think he was like cutting about. So,
but yeah, it's like I think I talked about it too, like before on my podcast, that moving to America was such a culture shock, because like you consider USA as a first quote unquote first world country, like with most European countries as well, right? So let's say developed Western country, and but America could not be more different than you think than anything else you would see in Europe. I mean, you get cars, you get this, you get that, like you get like the basic needs, all of those things are there, but there's just like so many small things that hit you from like from surprise point, where it's like, wait, like this is how it is here,
right?
Like you just learn those little things and you realize how different the life is. But it's also, I think LA specifically, like for the people who live in LA and only lived in LA, it's such a bubble. It's a giant bubble of bullshit, in my opinion. Like, at least that's something I've kind of realized over years. The moment you get outside of the city to the countryside, like the life is so different, different. And
everybody keeps talking about that place in LA called Joshua Tree. Like, they were always saying you really have to go and look at it. It's supposed to be like one of the funkiest places in California to visit.
It's a nice spot. It's pretty close to LA. Like, it's a small, I would say it's a pretty small park. I haven't been in Joshua Tree in like years, actually, so I don't know how it wouldn't change much. I mean, it's a national
something to do with crazy kind of tree colors and sand, and it's like
you have those you have those big giant boulders in the middle of a desert, and Joshua trees, right? So that's why it's called Joshua Tree. You have those weird looking trees, but there are a bunch of places like that in California. The thing about California, for people who love it and hate it, it's one of the states where it just has so many natural monuments that are just absolutely insane. I feel like anyone who goes to US and wants to visit California, they should by any stretch of imagination avoid LA and go to places like Yosemite or Sequoia, or the Death Valley, right? Those places where you just like, what the hell, or Mojave, right? Those big parks that are just so in terms of scale and beauty, they're just insane, and everything is sort of like hours away from you. That's the craziest part. Like, there's just so many places that have completely different landscape and vibe, and they're literally hours away. I think that's what makes California special. But to your point, you mentioned the stuff about being on the countryside and seeing seeing the life of Americans in like in the TV form. I had this epiphany myself where I would look at how my life is, and like kind of craving to that old times when I was a kid. I would visit my grandparents on the countryside in Poland, and the life was just slow, and you would just live by a day and sort of like not worry about the future. And there's something about that. There's definitely something about not being in the city, and I guess it just depends on like who are you personally, like what your goals are and what do you like. I know some people that love being in the buzz. They just love being in this right in the middle of everything, no quietness, just go. They just love being in that vibe, and they just wither when they are not in it. But I think I had this year like my self-discovery where to me it's like I think I'm starting to get completely opposite, and I want to have a quiet time and not be in the middle of everything,
Yeah, especially when you've got kids and family to deal with. Like, there's enough chaos in your house. You don't want that outside your door as well, right? You want some kind of semblance of being able to escape to a place where there is quiet, where there is rest, where there's time to reflect on your thoughts, and like you said, go cycling or walking, or something.
Just have time
something
for
where you can
family
switch
in
off.
general. You're not working to pay bills all the time,
Yeah, well, you came off Facebook recently as well, right? You made the announcement. You were like, I'm basically just not going to be here anymore, really. I'm just going to kind of bounce.
Not only Facebook, I completely deleted Twitter. I think that's just a giant cesspool of shit.
Yeah. It's weird though, because people are always like, oh yeah, man, for like art especially, like Twitter seems to be the place. But then I don't know if it's because I'm out of touch now, because I'm in my 30s, but I'm kind of like, I thought Instagram was like still the hookup for, posting stuff. But then I don't know much about Twitter as well. So, I mean, I came from the Facebook. I mean, I came from the MySpace generation. It's like fucking old, but like, man, like it's crazy now to think, Maciej, when I was first starting to draw before I left my job, I was ordering Nomon DVDs to my house. That's how
I'm that old as well.
Yeah, like it's crazy. So I mean, like when you see a lot of people now that are waking up to want to do concept art now, and like the internet's on your doorstep, it's almost
pretty overwhelming, actually.
Yeah, I mean, when I left my job in 2012, like ArtStation wasn't even a thing. You know what I mean? I had to physically Google concept art and find somebody that I thought looked good, and then send them an email and wait for like 6 months for it to get back to me when it was free. I mean, like that's now the polar opposite, right? Where it's almost instantaneous, because you have guys, almost on hand to deal with requests or like give people feedback. And, that's almost what I think was now diving into the art side of it. Like Learn Squared has exploded, and, that's one of the main places people now go to get education in the entertainment industry. Apart from, CGMA and, Nomon and other places. But, does it kind of freak you out now looking at the landscape and thinking like how much it has changed since you started teaching yourself?
Yeah. It changed a lot. I mean, I remember when ZBrush was not a thing, where it was like a 2.5D, weird canvas, 3D canvas painting.
Dynamesh wasn't even a thing yet. I mean,
forget about Dynamesh. I'm talking about the time where it was not even a 3D tool for sculpting.
Oh yeah, of course.
Just it's weird 2.5D weird thing. I remember it came out when I was at CRYTEK, and everyone was like, "What the hell is this?" Like, how would you even want to use that? That makes no sense. And then like a few years later, it's like everyone's sculpting in it, and making sculptures for film and video games, all that stuff. So it's like, okay, cool, interesting. So definitely, the landscape's been changing all the time, and it's kind of crazy how fast things go. You mentioned that everything is sort of like on the fingertips right now, and it's great, but it's also like overwhelming. I feel like we're in a times where when you want to learn anything, it's just it's hard. It's hard for someone who doesn't know how to curate and find the right source material. I feel like that's the biggest issue, because like if you get those quotes, you go on Instagram, and every now and then in the feed you get like this weird inspirational quotes you didn't ask for, and one is like from Elon Musk's like, oh, everything is free on the internet. It's like, it's true. You can learn pretty much any craft and literally get into like PhD level just from internet. I mean, I think Stanford and Harvard, they do have some of the classes like completely free online, like obviously after like some of the recordings of their classes, basically, right? And the lectures, they have that free online. And it's crazy. Like you can learn about nuclear physics and crazy stuff that you would normally have to go to university and pay a lot of money. Like you still have to do that to earn the PhD, but you can find that material online for free. The problem is, the biggest problem, and that's the big one in arts world, because I mean we live in that world, so this is the world we're familiar with, is that you turn on a video on YouTube, and for first 5 minutes you watch a face talking to you about random shit you don't want to hear about, and then they do something you wanted to learn about, and then how do you know if they're doing it in the right way, or if they're just like assuming that that's the right way to do, and to go? Because like when you do complex things with 3D or animation or VFX, there's just multiple ways of approaching the problem, and with the different software and all that kind of stuff. And it's very easy to get lost. It's like, am I using the right software to begin with for this? Is there a better solution out there? Am I approaching the problem from the right point of view? Like you will not get that answer unless you get someone who's absolutely at the top of the food chain when it comes to art to tell you that. And here's another problem. A lot of like absolutely amazing artists, they just don't want to teach. They just don't want to teach, because like I this is something I found, and it's kind of fascinating. It's like the better the artist, the less likely they're gonna teach. It's kind of funny. But I
or
do
don't make good
understand
teachers
that.
Also. Like not every artist can be a good teacher.
Of
also.
Course.
That's also a thing. Yeah,
exactly. And there's some teachers that are not necessarily the great artists, but they are amazing at teaching.
Teaching. Yep.
And they know how to explain the subject. Maybe the result's not going to be, it's not going to be your next Greg Mullins painting, but it's absolutely going to explain everything you need to know about how to get to that point. Versus, I've seen some of my favorite artists do tutorials, and they just, it's like, I don't know if I learned anything,
Yeah.
And there you would watch a video on YouTube that a person is trying to do something. It doesn't look that great, but he makes the point across, and then you can use it for your own good, and you see like, okay, that's pretty powerful, So it's kind of wild out there, and I get it though, like even from a personal level, teaching is incredibly taxing and difficult. It just takes so much energy, because like you have to rethink. If you want to teach correctly and get your point across, like you have to almost like teach yourself how to do that. And you realize down the road is that, in order to explain the subject, I actually have to like educate myself how I got to that point in my past 15 years that I just took for granted, and just, that is not an easy task.
It's just, I think, an unbelievable landscape of so much, like, just things shouting in your face for your attention constantly. And one of my friends who works in Glasgow, probably an artist that, not a lot of people know about, but he's worked on some of these massive projects for films, but he almost, in a sense, like, he's aware of the internet and knows, like, like online courses, but he sits just constantly every day with a sketchbook and a pencil. That's his medium. He can do stuff digitally, he uses Procreate, but like, his idea was like, I'm not going to watch a bunch of tutorials and get lost. Like, he just sat every day with a pencil and done constant life study drawings, life drawn, still life, just absolutely honing that skill, almost like a Kim Jong-gi level of like, I'm just going to do one thing, but do it fucking really well. And like, that's what will get me hired. And that's almost something that I was trying to explain to a bunch of students at a university, not long ago. I'm kind of teaching and like having like a small feedback session for some of the guys that I used to teach at university. But I'm almost, they always come to me like, oh, to be a concept artist, I need to know ZBrush, Cinema 4D, V-Ray, Blender now. I need to know how to photo bash, color. And then I try to nail into them like, look, just focus on drawing and painting and you'll get halfway there. Like, you'll almost get 90% of the way there if you just have a really core foundation. Don't worry about, the tips and tricks and things that will make you super fast, like, because I believe, this is just me personally, but I believe that like drawing is the foundation almost to everything you'll do in the entertainment industry. Like, if you can hold a pencil and get an idea across. Yeah, like, I'm not saying it's like the be and end all, but I feel like if you've got a solid drawing foundation, it will open more doors than it will close, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, some of my favorite directors do their own storyboards, that tells you a lot. Yeah,
Ridley and guys like that, they were drawing their storyboards well before they were filming stuff. And, it's like, even Cameron, like, he's famous for a lot of the stuff he was drawing early on. So, like I said, I think if you can get across a point with a pencil on a bit of paper, you're 90% of the way there, right? That's
it's definitely the quickest way to show what you need to show. You can open up the computer and start, photo bashing or kid bashing,
3D
and trying to design things, but nothing is faster than just sketching and doodling. Even if it looks like crap, you're still gonna get the point across
100%
what you want to show, and then eventually you can refine that. The beauty
expanding
of
it,
exactly. Yeah. I think the beauty of today is the fact that you can kind of choose who you want to be in this industry almost, Obviously there are trends and things that will get you more likely hired. But also it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be hired to make a living either. There's so many good examples of that already, like how social media basically becomes this platform where now, because of your presence and the amount of people that follow you, you can actually make a living doing your own thing, which is something I do. Coming back to social media, I think that's one of the reasons to sort of like keep your presence in there. But I would say that's the one and the sole reason to do that. I don't consider social media as a platform to communicate with people unless it's, talking with people that follow my work, and just giving a reply here and there. But honestly, it's not a platform to make friends at all. You asked about Twitter, like one of the reasons I deleted Twitter is just like, I looked at almost like the return of investment. Like how much time I need to spend to post and cater to, and also it just became absolutely frustrating because I would follow artists that I like, but I would be battered with political shit that I'm not interested with. Like suggestion from this and suggestion from that. It's like I don't want to look at that. Like this is not what this is not what I want to look at, and just I never found like acceptance of Instagram, which is I feel like the only social media platform right now that is purely like art focused in a way, like or art enabling. Let's put it this way, because it's all image based, right?
Yeah,
like people almost don't read; like they just look at the image.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
and they like literally don't read because you post like, I made this in Unreal, and the first post is like, is it real? Okay. You don't read. Cool.
Oh man, it's like even with Twitter, like it's the trolls as well, right? Or just the people who are like 10 years old with an account. I mean, like the funniest thing, like, I mean, Raph, like Raph Exetis, and Raph, like I remember he was like posting some of his Street Fighter characters or like the X-Men stuff he was doing, and like every third comment was like, "Yeah, man, good job, keep going." And you're like, it's a fucking director at Sony, for fuck's sake. Like, what the hell? He's like pissing himself laughing. Like, it's crazy to me some of the responses you get with people who just like are there to argue and nothing else. And it's like, and I feel sometimes like you don't want to respond. You're never supposed to look at the comments, right? But you just can't help yourself sometimes. Like, you just are like, oh, what is some dickhead saying to me?
Yeah,
like,
you just have to be religious about it, though. Like, if you read comments,
yeah.
I mean, I read comments, but I don't I read, but I don't read. Let's put it this way, right?
Yeah.
I read comments to see if there is any question that I feel like, okay, this is a legit question I could answer, to give some information back, like some actual knowledge back. But if there's a comment like, oh, it looks like X, Y, and Z, or did you use this brush or that? It's like, I don't answer those questions because I don't want to be rude, because like I usually post what I did in my description. So if you read the description, you know exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah.
I don't want to be rude to reply and be an asshole. It's just not in my nature. But also, it's just like one bad comment, like one person who's just being a troll or a vile person, or just a jealous person or whatever. Like even or a person that has a bad day and just wants to like unload on you specifically, right?
Yeah.
Because that happens too. Like one person will ruin your day. Like you can get hundreds of positive comments or people like saying thank you or sharing love or like, wow, this is awesome, like it's inspiring, whatever. And then one person says like, it looks like shit, I hate you. It's like, and that kind of lingers, even though it's just the one person out of like thousands that appreciate what you do. And here's another part on this, like I feel like for the longest part, everyone was a victim of, not everyone, I'm generalizing obviously, right? But let's say generalizing, most of us fall into a victimhood of, I want to see how many likes this is gonna get, and if not enough, then I did something wrong, right? And it almost like falls into this sort of like self congratulatory sort of behavior, whereas like, if I get a lot of likes, then I win, and if I don't, then I lose. It's like, that's not the point of why you're doing the stuff you're doing, unless you're literally just trying to game the social media for your for your monetary gain, whereas like the more likes, the more money I make, then yeah, okay, that makes sense. But if you're posting for likes, then you're this is something I've noticed myself, where I would not necessarily stress about it, but like be unhealthily aware about that issue. Like, okay, oh god, this post didn't make that much likes, like, maybe people don't like it. And then you start stressing about posting stuff that people may like, or doing stuff that people may like, instead of doing stuff that inspires you specifically.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing that for the wrong reasons, then you're gonna feel unhappy for sure.
Yeah.
And that's definitely I something I've noticed, where it's like, you post something, you make something you really wanted to make, and people really like it, right? And then you find yourself like, oh, I need to make another one of those, even though you don't really want to do it, just because like somewhere in the back of your head is like, oh, people gonna like if I do another one of those, But then you're basically using your energy to do something you're not necessarily inspired about, or not necessarily excited about anymore. And it just depends. Like, there are some people, like you mentioned, your friend, and there are other artists that we know really well that are just so insanely good at doing one thing, and they just perfected it, and it's just, for them, it's the one thing that they love doing all the time, and they'll do it forever and never get bored.
Yes. Yeah.
Like drawing. I love drawing. I'm gonna draw until I die, and this is, and I'm gonna be absolute perfectionist about it. And you see people like that, and it's kind of interesting because it's a completely different personality. Like I
because
find
he's so
myself
switched off from. I was
Yeah,
going to
go
say
ahead.
because he's so switched off from like the internet also, right? So he almost doesn't partake in that at all. Like he just every day gets up, draws for 10 hours a day, and then goes to bed and repeats. But then, like, obviously he's
Right.
drawing for clients, so he's doing work. But like his focus was what I'm trying to get is like, is social media the enemy? Is it the thing that's actually stopping people from reaching their potential because they're so focused on the noise?
Yeah, it depends on how you approach it, I guess, right? Like if you're approaching it as a platform where, it becomes almost like a discovery platform for your clients, or it becomes a business platform for your business, then that's a one thing. But if you're focused on, focused on making something that is good for you, but instead you listen to the crowd, then it might not be the healthiest approach, because it's like it's sometimes people are right if you're too in your own head, and you think you're the shit, but you aren't, and then you ignore what people say. You can get lost with that, obviously. But if you're like, if you know you're good, if you know what you do is good, and if your instinct is telling you that what you're doing is going to benefit you in the future, and you have a track record of following your heart and then benefiting from that, then you should probably continue doing that, right? I guess that's
100%.
So it's, people demonize and people praise the social media for being either the worst or the best thing ever. I think it's neither. I don't think I think I can agree with anyone who's saying social media is not really social. I can agree with that 100%. Because like for the most part, the connections you're going to make on social media are not going to be deep connections. I'm not saying always, but for the most part, like see what happens. Like do this, like not delete, like even just abandon social media for a month.
Yeah.
And see how many of the people that talk to you on a regular basis still talk to you after that. You're going to be 100%. Shocked. Not that many. Not that
you try
many.
to tell me that Ash has stopped talking to you, Maciej. You don't hear from him anymore.
Well, I don't see. The thing is, I talk with Ash on the phone.
Right. Okay. Old school. Yeah.
Old school. Yeah, old school stuff.
Man.
I have a bunch of friends which, like, I do. You asked about Facebook. I still have my personal Facebook, but it's completely blocked off, and I only use it to still sort of like talk to people that I want to talk with. That I haven't talked with, or asked them questions, or exchange ideas about art in general, just to have a connection like that. But I don't use it to post or do anything anymore. I do use my page, but that's like connected to my Instagram, so it's like it's almost like I have one hub, which is Instagram, that I use to basically have my presence out there, because that's something I don't want to do personally. I feel like it wouldn't be a smart move for me just to completely delete myself from the internet. That's not the way to go. I just realize I'm not stupid. I realize, and even just from like experience, like how much traction my work gets when it gets shared, and what kind of projects I get out of this. So obviously I will continue doing that, but I felt like it was overwhelming.
For me, Facebook in a way is like LinkedIn for me. Like I have like 3,500 friends, but like every single one, apart from maybe like my girlfriend and my parents, are all artists, are all industry people. So I scroll through it and see people posting about their work or the project they've just finished, or like if I'm even occasionally, because I've got I've only had 60 odd guests or something, but there's 3,000 people on my Facebook, so I'll see somebody post something and be like, he would make a good guest. I'll reach out to him. Cool, there's another episode. So like that's almost doing the work for me. So I feel like that's what Facebook to me is. That is the way of me reaching out to other creatives and professionals to get feedback, or to obviously speak to them on the podcast. So yeah, I get what you mean. For me, like Facebook, I don't think, even the younger people I know in my life who are like in their early 20s, for them, it's like Instagram, Twitter is mostly where they're kind of living, or WhatsApp exclusively and just having conversations with their friends. So it's like Facebook now is a total afterthought. I don't think a lot of people even really use it anymore.
It's shockingly one of the best advertising platforms, though, from what I hear. So
yeah, I think if you're definitely looking for things like shops or clothing or stuff in your local area, like it will help you in that respect. But I don't know how good it would be for trying to sell art courses. Although I say that, but I don't know have you found like with Learn Squared that has been something that you've utilized and has seen a response that's been good?
Well, I'm not gonna get into the nitty gritty of that, but
oh yeah, of course, I just a generalization.
I can tell you, it's. I feel like the general approach that I have, and it changed over years. Like I remember talking about this a year ago, where it's like, like just keep your presence on and just post everywhere. And it's like it changed over time, where you realize, okay, there are certain platforms that work for me specifically to basically be there and advertise myself, look at it from a perspective of business, but also, okay, if there's any interaction that I have with the community, which platform allows me to have the healthiest interaction. And to me, specifically, Instagram was that thing, right? I never, like, the most frustrating part, coming back to Twitter, like, it's just the limit of words you can say. It's just like, okay, like you cannot really go in depth into anything, and you almost have to post like 10 posts to explain what you want to do. And that was just such a frustrating thing, that it was just like, and when you post a picture that accounts for a number of words, like that makes no sense. And if you want a hashtag, then if you want to have a discovery, then you're not having any substance in your post.
Right.
If you want to have a substance, then you have no discovery. It's like, how is that making any sense? And why it's designed that way, And then I felt like I felt like I could have more meaningful conversation with people, or like back and forth on platforms like Instagram or even Facebook than on Twitter. For me, Twitter, and now with everything like politically going on, it's just for me, it's like a dumpster fire that I want to just stay away from.
Especially being where you are, and like the time it is, and again, we're not going to dive into that, but it's going to be interesting though to be online now, because that never used to be. I say even pre-2000s, that was never something that you had to be. That was never part of your life as an artist, right? You made your art. It's
a distraction too. I think that's the word I was seeking for last 15 minutes. It's the giant distraction. If you're not looking at it in a healthy way, you're basically distracting yourself from producing something that will meaningfully change your world, because talk is cheap, right?
I mean, like, even going back to forums, I think that's something that almost should come back, or be things that artists will seek rather than social, right? Because the forums are more focused on what you want to do. Our people around you are the same type of people you want to be around, and the feedback's more precise. You're not getting every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And I feel like that's definitely
sailed already.
It's difficult though, because how do you keep that lively and engaging with people? It's I think it's also, it's try to think about the amount of people who are like yourself, who is like huge in social media, and you have this presence, but there's obviously thousands of people that work in the games and film industry who don't have social media whatsoever. Like they just get up and go to their work and come back again. Like I know there's a really interesting guy actually I know who works in the industry, and he has an alias. Like he doesn't actually even use his real name. Like he just posts under like an alias, like a made up name, almost like Sparth, but then Sparth's name came from necessity, where like nobody could pronounce his name, so he basically made a username. But like this guy works in the industry and he just has his username. It just works from his house. So like it's like, is anonymity even better than overexposure? That's like a thing you could almost dive a whole podcast into, because how much exposure do you need? How much exposure do you need to make it in the industry? But then again, that comes down to like, well, where do you want to work? Which studio do you want to land at? Then, that's obviously varying from person to person. But
it also comes down, I mean, privacy is, I think it's a big thing, especially
Yeah.
the bigger you get. Like the more people are aware of who you are, the more likelihood you're gonna stumble upon someone who's absolutely out of their mind, you know?
Right. Of
Because
course.
like, even like statistically, what was the statistics? I think 1%, at least 1% of people in general are a sociopath, right? Or a psychopath or a sociopath. I can't remember. So
Probably
out of
both.
a
Yeah.
hundred,
Yeah.
statistically, out of 100, one person is absolutely out of their mind. You
Yep.
know.
Yeah.
So
Especially the amount of people in the world now, like billions and
yeah,
billions of
yeah,
people.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
And obviously, there's I'm not a master of statistics, nor am I a scientist or a social scientist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but and so I cannot tell how much of that translates into how many of those people actually use social media, all that stuff, right? But
Mm,
it's easy, or it's fair to say that the more people that are aware of you, the more likelihood you're going to find someone who's absolutely out of their mind and will go out of their way to, you know, make sure you're not feeling happy about yourself, right? So therefore,
yeah.
like troll comments and,
Hmm.
I mean, we hear those stories of like Twitch gamers and YouTubers getting swatted or
Oh,
getting
yeah,
death
yeah.
threats for no reason. It's like,
That just happened. That literally just happened at Ubisoft Montreal. Like somebody phoned in a fake hostage threat in the office,
yeah,
and
there you go.
that was exactly
So
crazy.
I
Crazy
don't
that.
blame
Yeah.
people who wants the privacy.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely crucial. I guess at this, because I think what I've noticed over past 2 decades of almost 2 decades of being in this industry in general, or just like
Hmm.
tracking on how, because I'm old enough to remember rotary phones, so
Same. Same.
so
Yeah.
um so like, and live pre-internet, and like how
Yeah. Yeah.
different it was and all those
Fucking
things.
56K dial-up modems, man.
Yeah,
OD,
and
like
those fucking
that
weird
stuff.
sounds like when it's loading. And then you want to watch and then you're loading a picture, and like, just like, it almost like all those old printers that just
Remember
prints
when
it
that
line
used
by
to
line.
happen, man? Oh, remember when that used to happen? Jesus
So
Christ. Yeah.
I would say I'm old enough to remember, you know, that the life had much lower frequency in general, if that's the right
Mm.
way to say it. Meaning,
Yeah. Yeah.
you would go about your life and learn
Mm-hmm.
and do things and feel like you're always progressing, versus now, no matter how hard you try, you're going to find someone, or even have a perception that the world is moving on and you're missing out, even though you're not,
Yeah.
right? And that's one
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
reasons, like, the fear of missing out, when people like, "Oh, I don't know if I can take time off from social media." It's the best trick to do, like I've found, is just to unfollow pretty much everybody, and then you realize, oh, the world is kind of moving on, and there's not much going on. Like when I go on Facebook, because I
Yeah.
literally don't follow anyone except,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, my company.
Right. Okay.
um I literally is like, oh, nothing is going on in the world, so I can leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And not pay attention to. And it's kind of crazy when you look at it. And like, you go on ArtStation, for instance, and you look at the wall of art that just almost every second is changing, right? Like, there's just so much
Yeah.
work being posted, and you feel like, oh shit, I'm such a piece of shit, I'm not doing any work. But then you realize, like, oh, wait a second, it's 100,000 people posting at the same time. So obviously it's gonna feel like you're lazy. But then you go onto like each of those uh, personal profile, and it's
Right.
like, oh, they post every few months. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
very difficult to like deceive yourself into thinking that you're not doing enough, until
Yeah.
you realize that, you know, maybe that's not true, or maybe it is. Like, if you haven't done anything in months and you're just sitting and playing games and watching movies, I mean, if you
Right.
want to do that, that's fine, but then you cannot be angry that the world is moving on. But if you're
Yeah.
progressing and constantly making things happen on your end that you're happy with, this is sort of like the trap, I would say, would be
Yeah.
probably the best to avoid. Not to pay too much attention to what other people are doing. Just be aware of what's going on and how trends are moving, and if those trends match towards your goals, and
Yeah.
then use that, like learning new software, or
Mhm.
improving your skills, or maybe your workflow could get much faster so that you have more personal time, because that's one of the things that always frustrated me. Like when people post, and I was a victim of that myself. I did that myself. Like it will be a hypocrite, but I've did it. It's a hypocritical to say that that's a frustrating thing, but also on the other hand, this is something I realized over time is that when you post something, it's like, oh, I did it in like 20 minutes. This sketch that looks photorealistic, and everyone is jealous, right? It's like, how the hell did you do that? And then you realize the client reaches out. It's like, oh, you do those sketches in 20 minutes? Let's do 20 for tomorrow. It's like, oh fuck, okay, I kind of fucked myself.
Yeah, okay. Oh well, dear. Yeah. I mean, like, is that a thing? I mean, like, it's slightly off topic, but I mean, I remember listening to a podcast, and the podcast is, basically the guy who is a beginner, but I felt like when I listened to it, just to try and check out what was on the the opposite end of the spectrum, where it felt like he just spent an hour complaining and about how much there is to learn. Oh my god, there's so much, like it's almost impossible to be an artist in the industry. Do you feel like it has got to a point where there's too much to learn, or do you feel like people just focus on the wrong things?
I feel like it's a skill. It's a very difficult skill to obtain, and it unfortunately takes years to get a taste and sense. And some people get faster at it and really nail it pretty quickly, and some people just take time, and it takes a lot of trial and error to get to a point where you have distinguished taste towards what is important and what's good, what actually facilitates for like a really good art, right? Or VFX or animation or whatever you do, right?
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of time, and I feel for people right now is something that is very, very difficult for artists these days. Like, because you mentioned, you remember the days where you would order Nomen DVDs because there was just literally nothing else to learn from. Yes. In order to get, like, if you want to learn 3ds Max, what would you read, a manual? Like that wouldn't tell you how to do stuff.
I was ordering David Finch's DVDs on how to draw the head.
Right. Yeah. So it was very difficult to come across knowledge. So you would by virtue, you had to spend a lot of time investigating and finding the right resources. But because it was very difficult to get out there in terms of like who you are, only like the creme la creme of artists would be able to get enough like publisher traction to basically have their work published and for you to actually discover, okay, this is like Ryan Church from ILM that did Star Wars that is teaching me how to design vehicles. I mean, I gotta fucking watch that, right?
Of course, yeah.
But now you go on YouTube, how to design vehicle, you get a million results, and which of them is good? If you don't have that taste or someone who curates that for you, it's very difficult to find something, and you're basically being overwhelmed with the amount of choices, And the saying that if there's too much, like the abundance of choices makes you not choose anything, right? Like you eventually you just get exhausted by how much stuff is out there, and it's very difficult to make a decision because then you question yourself, did I make the right choice?
Yes.
So I feel for people like I don't know how, like if someone asked me if I was to start over and learn today, where would I start? I would say I have no fucking clue.
Yeah.
I feel like it would be very difficult for me even to figure out who to learn from and what to learn. Because here's another thing that is I guess someone who is into this subject might be missing out, is that if you go on ArtStation, I'll bring up ArtStation again. Like if you go on ArtStation and just close your eyes and randomly click any image, like literally randomly with eyes closed, click any of the images on the front page.
Yep.
The stuff you're gonna see that's gonna show up in your browser is going to be leaps and bounds better than what we would see on forums when we were learning back in 2003 and 4.
Yeah.
In terms of quality. So, and there's also this thing where on average, people that are not into art specifically, like who are not privy of like how VFX works or how art is made, they'll have a much lower bar of what is a great artwork versus someone who lives art and you've seen everything and you realize there's a giant difference between a good art and a great art, right? This is something that comes with experience and taste, and you have to be aware and know what's possible. But for an average person that they don't give a fuck about what tools you use, they just look at the artwork, it's like, oh, this looks, oh my god, this is great. For them, the average image you will find on ArtStation is already past the limit of what's great.
Yes.
And you see that in film industry as well. You see it actually in every industry,
Yeah.
Because there's not that many examples where, like, if you look at the film landscape, how many films are absolute masterpieces? Not that many. And how many of them are actually commercially successful? Even less, So clearly people don't give a fuck. They just look at what's familiar in the first place, therefore so many sequels. And what's just easy to digest. And that comes back again to the frequency that I was talking about. Like back then, there wasn't so many things going on, and now it's almost like everything is attacking you from each side. It's like very difficult to focus and figure out what do you want to do, like what's good for you, what's it's good for learning, and then you feel like, oh, if I commit to learning Blender, am I doing the right thing because their Unreal Engine is here? Or maybe I should do Maya because Maya is like better connection in VFX industry, or maybe 3ds Max. And you're like, well, what the hell? Like, what am I supposed to do? So
what are you supposed to do, Maciej? You answer that question right now. We need to know. You're keeping a secret from us. What do we need to do?
Yeah, what do you need to do? What do you need to do? Yeah. You see, like, I know what works. There's only one thing that I found over 20 years that specifically for me always worked, is committing to something and then like really doing it, not talking about and just half-assing it, but like really doing it, because if you look down at what kind of art is being created out there, obviously there are some like hot topics like, oh, everyone's on Blender or Unreal Engine, but there's so much art that is just mind-blowing that is done in other software that it doesn't really matter which software you're going to use. It might matter for like productivity, I guess, at the end of the day. I would say, like, if you ask me, like, should I learn 3D software? It's like, well, I think ask yourself what inspires you enough, or like, what are you going to be obsessed about enough so you can just basically survive the onslaught of errors, bugs, and fucking shit not working all the time, so you don't get frustrated to a point where you just abandon it,
Yeah. I mean, it's like, even I know people who professionally do stuff for the industry and they don't even use Photoshop, right? They use Procreate and an iPad and an Apple Pencil. That's their entire pipeline, and that's a
new thing, by the way. But yeah, that's already true.
Yeah, and then even looking at guys like, I mean, we talked about Kim Jong-ji, but if you look at people like TB Choi, who have came out to LA, from Korea, and, she's just like, her knowledge of anatomy is groundbreaking to the point where, like, characters are her thing. She does them super well. It's like, again, specialization versus generalization, right? Do you do a lot of things okay, or do you do one thing really well? And like you said, like the one thing, like my friend in Glasgow who, just draws constantly in black and white, and he's a storyboard artist, so that kind of is part of the part and parcel, but also does visual development. But his sketches are so good, his penmanship, like his draftmanship, is so solid that he can be very versatile with that skill. So if you were wanting, like I say to the students I teach, I'm like, focus on drawing first, and then from there you can branch out to, painting. Once you've done painting, like, it's the thing you hear in every teacher, right? Foundations. It's the thing that will drive you forward.
Yeah, the tools are becoming so easy these days that it's, like, in order to render something realistic, it's not a giant feat to do that anymore. It's like, okay, you used real-time rendering or non-real-time rendering. The lighting comes from pre-calculated, physically accurate stuff, and you get materials that are already designed for you, and boom, and you have a realistic scene, right? So it's not like a difficult thing to do anymore to make something that looks realistic. In terms of how it renders, but to design something that looks good, that's another thing. So
I was going to say, I think like even just speaking to guys like, Robbie Johnson and Daniel Warrior when they had them on the podcast, and they were talking about The Last of Us too, right? Like, a lot of that stuff, maybe isn't like 90% 3D, but like the 10% to make that believable and fit within that world, that's when the foundations come in, right? Like the lighting's off. Like, you look at something like lighting's off, textures are off, the shadows are wrong. That's the stuff that your foundations prepare you for, right? Because you know yourself, when you were first maybe using photo bashing, was probably enough people doing that and they were doing it badly. And it was easy to spot, like when people were using photo textures to fill in the gaps of, I don't know how to draw. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, you can cheat so far, but then if there's a fundamental knowledge gap, you're never going to fill that with any kind of 3D.
Sure.
It's always going to be the case. Even with Blender, people think it's like you click a button and you've instantly got a concept. Like there is an amount of work that goes into that, that you have to understand. Even just using the render engine, people like, I'm using cycles, but like, you really should be using Eevee. But it depends what you want, right? If you want something that's pre-rendered, you're going to need cycles. So, there is a fundamental knowledge gap you need before you can make something look believable.
Yeah. And there is also, a question like which of those tools are you using them correctly towards what you need to get, and are you maybe unnecessarily adding that extra work that you don't need to add because you could achieve that by just cheating?
Yes.
Cheating meaning like, do I need to really design the whole environment, or can I use the HDRI to basically fix some of the problems that I would never focus on because they're just the background, Do I need to model and make a realistic texture for something that's in the background, or can I make like a approximation of a model and then just project a photo or something that just makes it like vastly easier and faster to do? I had Ian Hubbard on the podcast, and he's the Blender guy, the 1 minute tutorial maestro, who is just basically showing like, oh, you can make Blender look like a VFX for movie, and he's just doing it at the easiest possible way, just cheating things that you don't need to design because he knows that you're never gonna. It's not a video game where you have to look on the object from all the sides, right?
Right.
You're basically showing a shot, and if you can get away with that, then why not? So, there's definitely that.
Yeah, I mean, it's production versus like the base skill, because I remember when Lens Squared brought out the course with, I think it was Aaron Limerick, one of the Naughty Dog artists, and like Aaron could easily draw and render and paint all the shots in Last of Us when he was working on it, but like the reason he's using either 3D or 2D photo bashing is because it's a time saving thing, right? It's production. It's no necessity. It's just it's the thing he's doing to get the best shot the quickest. Whereas I think students confuse that so much with, I need to learn 3D because if I don't, I'm not going to be able to get the same results. You probably could get close if you just use traditional results, but like everything's like you said, everything's a tool. It's like you learn it because it's another it goes in your tool belt. It's something you can pick up and use if you need to. Like, I mean, even when you came to Naughty Dog originally, you were, Shadi was saying him and Eitan used to look over your shoulder and be like, what the fuck are you doing with like full textures?
They're exaggerating, but yeah.
yeah, but like still, like that was such a new concept even then, and then people were like, and now like 3D Coat and Blender and all those programs, if somebody comes into the studio and is like a master at that thing, and of course you're like, oh, what are you doing? How are you getting this effect like so quickly? And it's a thing that will work in production, but I think it also depends on where you want to work, right? If Naughty Dog is your end goal, then sure, you need to learn 3D to some extent. You'll need to learn photo bashing or some technique that will be able to use photo textures really quickly. If you want to work in an indie studio and draw things by hand, then sure, drawing and painting are your main skill sets. You probably won't actually need to touch 3D. It just depends on where you want to land eventually, right?
Yeah. It all comes down to how, when you're learning tools, like what is the reason to learn them, right? I
Right,
try to approach everything from a perspective of I'm not learning because it's a hot topic, because everyone is learning, therefore I should. Like
right.
I try to avoid looking at approaching the subject that way, because it just leads to wasted time, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, probably the some of the best artists that I admire the most.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny because like the best artists that I admire the most, for the most part, use completely outdated software. Like you would be like,
Right.
what? You're using that? I remember Vitaly using Softimage for modeling. Softimage, and that
But
was like
he's
a
some
few
kind of
years
freaky
ago.
god. Like he gets away with that stuff. Like so, I
Yeah,
mean,
but
like
he's an absolute killer when it comes to, hard surface. And
yeah,
he was using like the oldest possible software, you could find.
yeah, yeah,
Well, not oldest possible, but
yeah, yeah,
something that was outdated 10 years ago. I was like,
yeah.
"Oh, you're not using Blender with the new bells and whistles?" Like, no, I'm using something that doesn't even have 1/100th of the features that Blender has. But
Wow.
he's just so good at it. Like he's
Yeah.
not focusing on tools. He's focusing on how to use tools to make stuff that he wants to make, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
this is truth to everyone I know that
Mm-hmm.
uses software. They use it to make it as a tool, not as a end all be all.
Yeah.
So
It's the foundation thing, right? It comes back to like
right. Yeah,
if Ali
exactly.
had to use Max or Maya or whatever the fuck, he could use it, right? He's not going to struggle. He's not going to sit there for like a day and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like he'll figure that out. But then, like people when they like it's the same when we talked about drawing, right? If you have a solid foundation in drawing and painting, when it comes to designing something, you know, using 3D coat, using ZBrush, using whatever, it's just something that is another tool in the belt. It's no, like if ZBrush died tomorrow or like all the software went away, like how well would you then, if all you had left was Photoshop, how well would you do? You know what I mean? Like, and
Right.
for a lot of people, including yourself, they'd be like, well, that's fine. I can draw and paint. I don't need to use photo textures. Like if I have to use just paint, I can do that. So yeah, like that's the thing that will make you, I think, sustainable in the industry, right?
Hmm.
More future proof. If you can then say, well, I know how to 3D model, so whatever is the next Blender, cool, I can handle that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, and yeah, like you said, it's just deciding what type of artist you want to be, right?
Yeah, and you look at software, like people are getting excited about the new update that, oh, this software has this new thing that is just amazing, and then
Mm.
are you going to jump ship just to realize that the software you're in is going to have that same feature a month later? It's
Yep,
like,
yep,
and here's what comes with when you get the latest and greatest, you also get the untested. Meaning the
mm,
software might be buggy, the drivers might not work that well just yet, and
yeah,
the feature that you're excited about is going to crash and corrupt your project, and you're fucked.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's like it's a gamble. I guess when you're learning those things, it's one thing, but when you're working on the project, that's another thing as well.
Yeah.
I only use things that I know are like bulletproof for professional
Mhm.
projects, because the moment it crashes, then I'm
Yeah,
fucked. Like, okay,
yeah, yeah.
I've
You kind
wasted
of
so much time to get here instead of doing it in the way where I know it works.
especially in film, right? You can't turn around to a director and be like, "Oh, you're gonna have to wait a day on me because my project's corrupted." It would be like, "Oh well, bye." Like like if that's, I mean, like at your
Yeah.
stature, of course, that wouldn't happen. But like if you're early on and you're so experimental that like you're holding up production, then that's going to be a clusterfuck. That's something that we
Yeah.
all.
It's kind of funny with film, the directors and production designers, they don't necessarily give a fuck if you're using the latest. Like they don't actually care
Yeah,
what are you doing. They
of
only
course.
care that you're going to get a result that they need in order to build the set or make the costume or build the VFX. That's all they care about. How
Yes,
it's looking and how you did it. I mean, obviously it has to look good.
of course.
There has to be, that kind of the baseline. But
Standard. Yeah.
it's funny because like I can find a lot more inspiring art on ArtStation than in film industry. But then when I look at the art that is done in the film industry, on the other hand, it's reliable as hell. Like, meaning I just need to do this, and then once it's done, this is exactly serving the purpose that is needed to be served. Meaning, it shows how the environment's laid out. It shows what kind of material is going to be used for building that prop. They're not going to take your painting and put it behind the actor. They're going to build the set, you know? So they need to know how this works in a relationship with what the scene's going to be, because later on, the DP, the lighting, all of that's going to be built completely separate from what you did. And sometimes it happens that, you know, some of the illustrators do such an amazing job in conveying the scene and lighting that is literally translated to what the scene's going to be like, because the VFX supervisor and the director and the DP, they're like, oh shit, it looks awesome. Let's just build it, you know, because it's exactly how we want it. But that's not. If you can get that, that's great. But the reliability part is the important one, because if you work with a production designer or a director, and no matter how good you do, but they know for certain that if they give you something to work on with the expectation that this is the results that they want to get after, you're always going to deliver no matter what, right? They don't care if you build it in Unreal, or if you build it in Blender, or if you use 3ds Max, or if you use SketchUp, or if you draw on it with pencils. Like, that doesn't matter. It matters that you can do what they want you to do, that you can deliver a very specific thing that they are after. And that's only thing that matters. It's a little different in video games, where, I mean, it's true in video games as well, because like your art is just a reference at this point. Like what you do with your paintings for your concept art for video games, it's a reference for pretty much 100 other people's to basically build it, you know? So it's the same. I mean, it's true as well in that situation. But
I was going to say, but I think, again, focus on the software. I think it's one of these things that, like, if you are so, you know, if you're constantly chasing trends, in 5 years, the thing you sunk your time into might change again. And then what do? Do you switch again? Because, like, I mean, going back to, like, I think I was at an industry workshop, like 2015, 2016. I think Ash was there that year. But, like, I was speaking to Chris Rosenworth at the time, and, you know, he was doing all the pre-production on, like, I think a Bond film. But he was talking back then about how they were using VR headsets to build in pre-production sets, and then put the headset on the director's head, and he could physically walk about in the set. Now, that was like 5-6 years ago. So you'll probably find that, like, even the stuff you're trying to learn now when you walk into films, you know, there's probably stuff you guys are using that are already 5 years ahead of everybody else. So that's why I'm saying, like, foundation is so key, because, you know, as long as you can paint and draw well, the tool set won't matter. Like, you know, Blender's here today, great. In 2 years, what's the next thing? And like you said, with DPs, with VDs, those guys are like, you know, they're not interested in what you done the final result in. It's just that you have a result. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and software is just software. It's just a tool for you to get things done, and you can learn it. You can learn one or another. Obviously, it's going to take time to readjust if you need to change the software you're using, but at the end of the day, it's just a tool. And you have to look at it from a point of view as like, okay, is this tool helping me to get the work done, or it's getting in the way of getting the work done, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, in essence, that's what kind of takes me to my next point in looking at Showtime, which, of course, congratulations with, that landed in August. That blew up, and it was huge. It was incredible, man. You know, I mean, you're like a one-man workhorse when it comes to production. Like, I think, you know, we all had expectations for what you were going to drop, but then I think we were all surprised with, you know, when we watched it. I say we, it was like me and 5 other of my concept buddies, and we were all like around the monitor being like, "Oh, it's nearly cut here. He's going to post it, and we loved it, man. I mean, we were all, you know, Ghost in the Shell fans, Akira fans, of course, you know, back in the days, and I think it's like, you know, is that something that is like the aim eventually? Is that like, you're going to want to make your own anime movie, right? That's
I don't know. Like, honestly, the goal was to make a short film, right?
right. Yeah.
And that was my initial goal. Like, what's gonna happen after with Showtime?
Mm-hmm.
It's yet to be decided. Like this, I don't. I wasn't particularly attached to the idea that this is going to be this giant thing that I'll be developing into a feature film or whatever, right? That was never the
Right.
goal. The goal was to prove myself that I can direct and make something happen, like make an animation or make a short film that has
Right.
some kind of substance that can be something more than just what I've done so far, which is just concept art and illustration, right?
Right.
So that was the goal, and I feel like I achieved it. And well, I mean, obviously, uh, it's subjective whether people. I feel like from the feedback I got, people loved it and asked for more. So
Yeah. Of
I
course.
really appreciate that. Obviously,
Yeah. Yeah.
the personal goal is already reached, meaning like what stem out of Showtime already got me a commercial gig that is my like commercial director role.
Right.
Um, debut. So I already got that. And
Yeah.
what happens next, I don't go as far. I just,
Mhm.
look at what's the next project that is really inspiring for me personally. And then I'm going to pursue that and just going to make it happen. And then
Yeah.
whatever tools are needed to be used to make it happen, I will learn those and make it happen again. That's
Yeah.
I just feel like with everything going on, like how much stuff is out there, software wise, hardware wise, and the world
Yeah.
moving on, and people getting excited about different trends and the frequency of progression, all that stuff. It's like, in order to not get overwhelmed and distracted, you just have to pick something that you're excited about and just go for it. So
Yeah.
I've been looking at my work pretty much from that lens for past year, maybe 2 years. And
Right.
yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Is that a thing also that you use a lot of Eastern influence still in your work? I mean, like, you're working these big, massive Western Hollywood budget things, but like, I mean, even for me, like, I try to incorporate like my love for Eastern, anime, Japanese film, even sitting on a Sunday watching Kurosawa films. Like, I just got my Katsuya Terada 10 of 10 retrospective in today, so I've been browsing through that, and there's a bunch of Japanese artists that I love, guys. Some of the original, like Akira and Akira Vosa, that worked on like Street Fighter and stuff, that I just illustration wise blow me away still. Is that something that you're still taking, or like, I mean, is it something where you originally, like, you dived into stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Akira, and that was kind of your main point for a lot of the years, and now you've kind of moved away from that, or is that something that you still dive into?
I don't know. Like, obviously, there are some projects that I have in mind that cannot answer
Of course.
whether
Yeah.
this is true or not.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, when
I mean,
I
have you got an active role and sitting in Crunchyroll and diving into stuff that is maybe the cut? I mean, like I'm watching stuff like Boku no Hero, Academia, and stuff like that. Like, are you still trying to partake that side of anime and Japanese animation? Is that something that's still involved in your life?
I've you mentioned Akira and Ghost in the Shell. Those are like the two sort of like tentpole,
Yeah.
sort of like a cornerstone animes that basically changed my perspective on what's possible and what art is. When
Yes.
I grew up watching those, and I was always inspired. And for me, they were always like the sort of like the pinnacle of this is what anime is supposed to be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And there is a lot, and so one of the reasons why when I made Showtime short was to sort of like prove a point that you can go back in time and refresh sort of the visuals towards the modern look without going expressively too far into that direction of like completely 3D or you know
Right.
I guess maintaining the artistry of how those movies were made back then. Because when you look at the working the behind the scenes of those projects, it's absolutely insane how they made them. You know, the amount of work that went into that. I don't think there's any other anime these days that are made in the same with the same love and passion than those that were made back then. And there's only a few, you know, like you could only count a few. You would probably run out of ideas of like absolute masterpieces of animation in the palm of your hand when it comes back, like looking back in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of like the quality that I admire, and I'm not personally attached that this has to be anime or film or anything else. It's just the sort of like the attention to detail, you know, like when you pause, you know, one of the most interesting one of the most interesting exercises you can do is watch Ghost in the Shell or Akira and pause, and then just like break down to see what you see. And there's just so many times when I would watch Ghost in the Shell and pause in like a moment, and look at the screen and try to observe what's there. And I was like, holy fuck, there's so much detail that you miss out. It's like it's there, it's adding the fidelity, but it's such a subtle thing that you don't even pay attention to. But if you take it away, you will notice, you know? And I like to do an exercise like that when I pause and look and observe and get like, holy crap, there's just so much artistry that goes into. And it applies to everything, to animation, to film, to illustration, to, you know, sound design, like all of those things. You know, you learn that, you know, there's something about the love and artistry about making things like absolutely the most beautiful you can without cutting corners and like, oh, this is good enough, let's move on, you know? Because I had that with Showtime as well. Like I would have so many moments where I was just like, oh, it's good enough, I can move on. And I was just like kick myself in the butt and say like, no, it's not good enough, because like once you finish and it's done, right? You're gonna regret that you haven't done. You're gonna be pissed that you haven't finished it or you haven't added that extra juice to it, you know? And obviously you can go forever. Like I look at my animation back now and it's like, oh, crap, like I wish I did this completely differently.
Of course.
But that's in the hindsight. So yeah.
I mean, like, I was like, even going back to guys like Miyamoto at Nintendo, I mean, I think he's famously quoted as saying, you know, a rushed game is bad, a delayed game is eventually good. So like, you know, if you try to push something out quickly just because you're like, I need it just to come out, like, you know, you'll probably have people still going wow, but maybe no like, oh my god, wow, you know, like I think that's where Showtime crossed the line. You know, even I can't tell you how many documentaries I've watched on, you know, Ghibli movies getting made, and you know, the level that goes into even just the hand animated stuff, you know, the individual cells, you know, how some of their movies would take years and years and would never come out because they just were never happy with them. And again, that's different though. That's the Japanese standard as well. That's the way they work, is like everything has to be perfect. It has to be to the finest and smallest detail. It has to be perfection. So I think any level of that in your work is great, because obviously you want to show your best side in everything you do. You know, you don't want to put out something that's attached to your name and it's like it's mediocre, because then forever it will live as a mediocre product, and you know, you tear your hair out. So yeah, I think it's like, I think the reason I keep my eyes and my ears to the Japanese floor of animation and film, you know, even a lot of their, you know, you look at a lot of their animes now, they're actually using more and more 3D because it's a production thing where it saves a lot of time, right?
Of course.
Like I think Demon Slayer is one of the biggest grossing movies over there just now, and series, and most of the characters and environments are done in 3D because it's so quickly, you know, you can push that stuff out so quickly, but also it's so high fidelity. And I think keeping that in the loop when you're making stuff is that, you know, because I think the biggest growth I have when I'm as an artist is looking for people outside the industry, looking for people that art involved in concept art and games and, Call of Duty and whatever. There's some guys I love who are like, they're just illustrators that are in some small town down in England, but their craft and their hone is so, specific and amazing. And, they're just illustrators, they're just painters, they aren't involved in the industry. They have a unique perspective that I think is great to have in the work you do. I think if you continuously focus on, like, or who worked in the latest Call of Duty or who worked in The Last of Us, those guys are great in their own respect, but I think the more you look outside of that, the quicker you grow as an individual.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I think that's a good place to wrap it, Maciej. I think I've kept you for long enough. I mean, when you get involved in talking about art, right, you could be here forever. Just,
Yeah,
talking.
There's a lot of subjects we touched upon that by its own could be, their own episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, it was great. And again, just thanks for coming on and giving up your time. I'm extremely grateful for the hour I got with you. I think it's I definitely know people will enjoy it. I mean, I have, so I think if I'm enjoying it, everybody who will listen to it will really enjoy it.
Yeah, we'll see by comments.
Yeah, wait for the trolls to hit. But
I appreciate for the invite, though.
Nobody fucking listens to this podcast anyway, so it's fine. So
that's all good.
Yeah. Cool. So where can people find you, or where should we be looking to see your stuff? What are you doing these days?
My website, kuciara.com, my Instagram, my Maciej Kuciara, which is my first and last name. Those are the primary places. Obviously, I have my own podcast. Funny you mentioned, like, nobody listens to it. It's like, when I started, nobody was listening to mine either. So,
yeah, I know.
It takes forever.
No, man, even just like occasionally getting, I remember I got an email, I think a couple of months ago, and somebody was like, you inspired me so much with having the courage to leave your job. I've turned 30. I've just left my steelworking job to go back to university and be an artist. And I was like, the tears were running down my face as I was reading the email. I was like, oh my god, that's so incredible. So like,
those emails are great.
Yeah, I've always said if like one person is listening and they enjoy it, then job done. So, but I was actually really surprised. Like last year, going to Lightbox, and like I was helping Raph with his table, and like every second person was like, "I know your name, your voice from somewhere," and like, "Oh, Digital Artcast, I love you," and I was like, "What the fuck? You're kidding me? Like, you're out here in LA, you know my name?" And yeah, it's freaky, man. But you do it for the love. You don't do these things for any cash or anything else, because there is no money in it, but like it's as long as you feel like you're helping somebody.
There is money in it. It's just you have to hustle a lot and eventually get there, But it's a completely different subject. This is something it has to be. It's almost like a job. Like it has to become your job, where you just treat it in a way. And there are a lot of podcasts that do really well financially because they just become big enough to garnish the sponsors, you use a podcast to push your own, merchandise and whatnot, or lessons or whatever. There's ways of monetizing those things, but overall, generally speaking, you don't start from the idea of like, I'm gonna be rich by making an art podcast.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for Raid Shadow Legends to hit me up. Like, I'm just waiting for that email to drop every day now. Like, just cool. Okay, so thanks again to Maciej for coming on. If you guys have any questions or want to add any comments down below, I'm sure you'll check them out at one point. I'll leave all his social media and links below. You can check him out at various places. Also check out Learn Squared, which Maciej is part of and the founder of, that you guys can learn online. Some really great resources there.
Absolutely best place to learn.
It's the best. Fuck everything else. It's so good. Man, and just spam his inbox. It's cool. That, and then of course there's also Art Cafe. Maciej has his own podcast where he has guests as well and speaks to people from the industry. So check that out as well. Again, I'll leave it in the link below. If you're watching us on YouTube, that's great, but we also are on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iTunes, all that kind of stuff. And likes, comments, shares, it always helps the podcast. I think we're nearly at 3k. I pray to God when Maciej shares it that we get somewhere close to that. That would be great. That would be a nice Christmas present for me if I got a couple more subscribers. But yeah, man, indeed, thanks again for listening, guys, and thanks Maciej, and we'll see you guys later.
Bye. Appreciate having me. Thanks, guys.
Yes, indeed. Bye.